Welcome to The Green Rush, a podcast about the intersection of cannabis, the capital markets, and culture. On a weekly basis, hosts Ann Donahoe and Louis Goldberg of KCSA Strategic Communications speak with the business leaders, financial experts, cultural icons, legislators, and generally interesting people moving the cannabis industry forward. This week, Ann and Louis are speaking with Hershel Gerson, CEO and Managing Director at Ello Capital, a new investment bank serving the cannabis industry. Ello Capital is a boutique investment bank providing M&A, capital raising, and strategic advisory services grounded in integrity, transparency, and credibility to companies and investors navigating cannabis, hemp, and impacted industries. The cannabis industry is going through a massive cash crunch impacting all components of the supply chain, and Ello Capital, Hershel and his team are sitting right there in the middle, providing access to funding, consulting, and M&A advisory work. If you're truly interested in the business of cannabis and how this industry gets funding, then this is the episode for you. So don't sit back, lean forward. Now into our conversation with Hershel, Ann, and Louis.
Hershel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. We really appreciate it. We know how busy you are.
Thank you, Louis. I'm very excited about being here and talking to you, and wanted to reiterate as well that we appreciate you asking us to be on.
All right, let's jump right into it. I'm not going to start off with the softball to let you get warmed up. I'm going right at you, okay? Ello Capital is a new investment bank or a broker-dealer focused on the cannabis industry. You guys just released a new liquidity analysis of the public cannabis companies, and the outlook looks pretty grim for a few of the MSO and other players. So what the hell happened? What's going on in this space?
Yeah, so, as we looked at the cannabis universe and people going out public, the real liquidity and investor universe that was funding the growth and expansion in cannabis was primarily the Canadian retail investor for a very long time. And as people were looking at the opportunity, valuations, were at levels that potentially weren't sustainable given the prospects of the industry. And I think we all agree that the industry wasn't going to grow linearly, that there would be potentially fits and starts and some variation to that curve. And as a result of some regulatory issues and potentially a delay in the ability to go out to the market aggressively, the growth that was expected didn't occur at the rate at which the companies initially projected. As a result, there was a reset in valuations, and there was a decline in the market, which we're all seeing. There's about a 50% sell-off in the market, which really we've only seen a sell-off of that magnitude potentially two times. One was the dot-com bubble and the Great Recession, where a market fell off that dramatically in a 6-month period. As a result of that, the capital markets weren't as available to all these companies in order to continue on their growth strategic initiatives. So what ultimately happened was the strategies that a lot of these companies took on was a shotgun approach where they would go into multiple states, try to build a monopoly or market share in those states, and then take advantage of being a first mover. Unfortunately, that was a very capital-intensive strategy, and as capital dried up, they can no longer sustain that strategy going forward and really needed to start operating to profitability and cash flow positive operation.
Do you think that the management teams of the companies that went public on that rush to get onto the CSE or the NEO or the OTC, underestimated what their capital requirements were going to be. They didn't realize that if you have licenses in 10 states that you were going to need hundreds of millions of dollars to build out these portfolios? Or did they just assume that the cash spigot would be open and the access to low-cost capital would just never end?
I think it was more of the latter, where they just thought that the availability of capital would be there for duration and could fund their operations. And potentially they didn't quite understand the magnitude of capital necessary to go into a new state. Given the lack of interstate commerce, you have to essentially build an entire new infrastructure in every state you go into. That means cultivation, distribution, and retail. And a lot of those states, it's potentially difficult to get people to invest in cultivation because they're concerned about interstate. So there's a lot of dynamics in play that did require each company to essentially invest in that full infrastructure in each of those states. And that's a very, very capital intensive strategy. And I don't think that they believed that they would be cut off from capital so severely, so quickly as we've seen.
Hershel, I think what was so impactful about this study is that you name names. And I have a couple of questions. What was the methodology used for developing this data? I think it's all public information. And were you concerned about pissing anyone off?
Good question. So all the information is public. So essentially, all we did was we looked at the last quarter, looked at the cash flow from operations and their CapEx to estimate essentially, because most of them, it's negative when you put those two together, their burn rate, and looking at their cash on the balance sheet and saying, look, if you're going to continue at this rate, how long or how much cash do you have to sustain the business? Assuming that there's no liquidity really available in the market, how are we going to solve for this situation? Now, there's a few ways to solve for it, and I'm not saying that any of these companies can't solve for it in any of these ways, right? One, you could shut off your CapEx. You can essentially say, look, we're going to take the assets we have in the ground today. We're going to maximize cash flow from them until such time that the capital markets open up and we can get new capital in the door. The other mechanism is the investors that are currently in there can continue to equitize the business. The other area that could be hugely beneficial and sustain the business is obviously 280E for the federal and state governments to give to take some pressure off the industry by either descheduling cannabis on the federal level or the states rolling back or giving some breathing room related to the sales taxes within the system. So there's a lot of mechanisms here external to in the regulatory environment, external to each of these companies, and then also things within the control of the companies in order to solve for this problem.
I have a question that kind of just made me think of this. And I don't know if you know the answer, but if cannabis was to be or rescheduled, is that an automatic trigger for 280E to go away, or are there other things that need to happen to make it go away?
So my understanding and talking to lawyers and other people that are more fluent in this matter is that 280E is applicable to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs. It was put in place during the Reagan era with the war against drugs in order to put some more pressure on essentially drug runners to essentially say, look,
cocaine specifically. It was really cocaine.
Correct. So, if we catch you, we're going to be able to hit you with substantial back taxes. And, for all intents and purposes, Al Capone kind of scenario where we're going to hit you on back taxes and essentially be able to put some pressure on you there. And marijuana was included in that as a Schedule 1. If it gets reschedulized to Schedule 3, then 280E is no longer applicable. My understanding is 280E is Schedule 1 and 2.
your liquidity analysis got a lot of media attention. It was in Barron's, it was in Business Week, Market Watch, and all over. What has the impact or the feedback that you've gotten from the industry been?
And did you piss anybody off?
Right. Well, that's where I was going. Like Ann asked, did you piss? Who did you piss off, and how did you make amends?
Well, I'm not going to speak to any specific names, but I did get a few inbound calls from some CEOs asking me, why in the world would you put this out there?
We had some.
Look. Yes. And my message back was I'm not making any, I'm not treating anybody differently. I'm not making any assertions as to what your solution is for this issue. Anybody who looks at Cap IQ or any kind of market data machine is going to come out with the same analysis. So we're trying to be insightful to the industry and stewards of the industry, and we're here to help you relative to this dynamic. In addition, I'm all for this industry. I came into it not only from a opportunistic standpoint, but believe that there is a lot of altruistic reasons related to medical applications, social justice, and sustainability, where it's very exciting. For me, and what I like to say, I'm probably the most left-leaning investment banker on the street today. But I'm an advocate also for the federal government to descheduleize, give us some breathing room on 280E, and for the state and local municipalities also. They need to give some ability for these companies to operate like any other industry. And given that there's all this altruistic components to the industry, they should be supportive for us and, give us an environment that's sustainable so that we can, build something that, for all intents and purposes, we all believe in and think that it goes beyond just a, recreational purpose product.
Let's take a step back. Because we really haven't talked about who you are, who Ello Capital is. The U.S. cannabis industry has been sorely underbanked by investment banks. So how did Ello Capital come about? What do you guys do? Who are your clients? Why are we talking to you?
We're doing
Getting
this
right at it, Lewis. Getting right at it.
I told you there's no easy questions here. But you know what? This is answer it how you want. But the truth is, there is a crying need for investment banking. So who are you?
So I appreciate that. I'm a bald guy with a lovely wife and 2 kids at home. That started an investment bank with a 1-month-old at home. So you can imagine it's been quite the journey. No, and I should say, since it's Valentine's, I love you, honey. Holly, can't wait to have dinner with you tonight.
She's not going to hear this tonight, but that was really sweet.
But so look, I've been a CPG banker on the street for a very long time. I have over 15 years. I was at Credit Suisse, BNP, and Macquarie Capital most recently, and spending a lot of time in consumer and CPG. I started off in health and wellness, and really gravitated to some of the disruption that's going on in there with better food ingredients, cleaner ingredients, less ingredients, less preservatives, and so forth. It just so happens my wife is a cancer survivor, in addition to being a nutritionist, and was as an exercise physiologist. So she really made me aware of a lot of the issues going into the food supply, whether it be commercial farming, glyphosates, and so forth, and started me off on a paleo diet and so forth. And I've seen just myself and speaking to her and understanding the science that there's a lot of things that potentially we're not doing great in our food supply, and that was one of the reasons I got into the health and wellness trend and really try to support companies that were growing in that industry. As part of that, I started getting more exposure into cannabis, and also started seeing a lot of executives that had long relationships with getting into the industry. So a gentleman by the name of Bill Toller is a mentor of mine. I've known him for over 15 years while he's CEO at Advanced Pure Foods, as well as Hostess, a guy that I really respect. Got into the industry. He is now the CEO of Hydrofarm, which is a distributor of hydroponic equipment and nutrients into the space. And other executives that I had a growing or had appreciation for were also getting into the space. So I was looking at different ways for myself to get into the space, because not only was it a great opportunity, but I really felt strongly about the social justice issues surrounding cannabis. As we all know, usage rates are the same. However, incarceration rates are significantly higher related to minorities, related to the drug. In addition, as I mentioned, my wife's a cancer survivor, and was hearing a lot of stories about families whose loved ones were going through hospice and had two different loved ones. One was on an opiate, and another one was using cannabis to help mitigate some of the effects of their cancer treatment. And just the interaction with their families was way more productive and fulsome when they were using cannabis versus their other family members who were using opiates and really couldn't connect to their families, given the nature and how that drug affects you. So from those two aspects, I believe wholeheartedly in the industry. And then, when I joined this platform, there was a gentleman, Evan Enneman, who I attribute a lot to helping me understand the industry.
And Evan is a friend of ours and the podcast, so everybody knows Evan.
Yes. He's obviously a thought leader in the space, and really thought I could leverage his understanding, and really informed me, and a lot of my appreciation comes from him, into the sustainability factor. So we're actually talking to a company today that's pushing forward on hempcrete. So they're using hemp in order to, as a building material that's essentially doesn't burn. And also helps with humidity factor. So it helps with your HVAC system and brings down electricity costs. So it's fire retardant, and it has these attributes that help with electricity. So there's a lot of applications here for the industry, in addition to pharma. There's people that we know that have epilepsy and using the drug to treat their epilepsy that they weren't able to treat with drugs that are available through prescriptions today. So, look, what better industry could you get into where there's a huge market opportunity and has all these altruistic attributes? So then it was about, once I decided I want to get into the industry, then it was where to get in and how to do it. Was it going to be corporate or through an investment bank? And, I decided to join MGO and Ello for one reason, was Evan Enneman, who obviously was a founding partner at Casa Verde, a thought leader in the space, and really somebody in the market. And in addition to our parent company, MGO is a financial services top 50 accounting firm that's been in the cannabis space for over 5 years, touches over 400 different cannabis companies, and provides a full range of financial services. So again, a lot of connectivity and ability to provide a full spectrum, differentiated product set to our customers that is really, doesn't exist today on the street. So all that in summation is we have 100 professionals today dedicated to the cannabis space. We provide a broad set of services across audit, tax, technology, real estate, staffing. We have an agency to help incubate brands. And then within the investment bank, we have over 17 professionals and offices in LA and New York. So I can safely say that we are the largest financial services platform dedicated to cannabis, hemp, CBD, and impacted industries.
The cannabis industry has been built by a mix of pirates and pioneers. And as our friend and client Troy Dayton from ArcView has said, the pioneers get slaughtered and the settlers thrive. And among the current crop of companies that you look at, who do you think is going to thrive and who do you think is going to get slaughtered? And if you don't want to name names, can you give us some general guidelines on, although you don't seem to have a problem with that, but can you give us some general guidelines on how to evaluate long-term prospects of these companies?
Let's be clear. I named the top 75, the top companies in the space that had a market cap of 75 million and above. So I didn't cherry pick any names related to my analysis. It was a full spectrum of names relative to market cap, and we cut it off at 75 because we had to cut it off somewhere, and we felt we did a broad enough canvassing of the universe that was the most interesting and a good data set. So who's going to survive and who's not going to survive? Look, I think today the best strategy, most relevant strategy in a capital environment that's not as liquid as we had before is a single state, get some density, get a cluster, get some economies of scale related to all the infrastructure we talked about, and try to get a large market share and operate profitably, and then go out from that base of investment and cash flow. And there's been some companies that have gone with that strategy. I think they're going to ultimately be the leaders as we go into this next, what I would call 2.0 of cannabis, where there's a changeover in the management team. Some of the early pioneers who potentially were getting in from a much more financial aspect. So I think there's potentially some players in there going around and saying, hey, I can acquire 10 assets for, call it 5x revenue, and I know the public markets will give me 10x revenue. I can just play this arbitrage, and I'll take my chips off the table, and I'll make my money, and say la vie. And some of that was going on, and that's basically a strategy of who's got the chair, musical chairs, and the guy who's in the chair last, he's going to not do so well. So, and you saw some of that. So now what needs to happen in 2.0 is, again, I hope the federal government gives us some breathing room. And then two, like real operators are going to come into the space that have been operating in other industries. I mean, ultimately, selling cannabis, while there's some regulatory differences, it's not too much different from selling a Twinkie. There's Twinkies have wheat. You have a manufacturer that puts, exactly.
And infused Twinkie sounds like the greatest thing ever.
That sounds delicious, right? Someone get on that.
Or a ring ding, or ho ho. Give me a devil dog, an infused devil dog, and I'm good all day.
You get some wheat, you process the wheat, it goes into an edible. The edible is packaged in a manufacturing facility. It goes to a distributor with Cisco, Unify, whatever. It goes to convenience. It's sold through a retail channel in that respect, convenience, and gets in the consumer's hand, and they eat the Twinkie. I mean, cannabis is no different. I mean, there's cultivation, there's processing, there's a dispensary, and so forth. So a lot of the attributes that made people successful in retail are going to be the same attributes that make people successful in cannabis, but they obviously have the overlay of regulatory that they have to understand. And I think some of these more sophisticated operators get it, and they're coming into the industry, and I look forward to them coming into the industry. What they're going to be expecting, given when they come out of traditional industry, is the ability to have service providers that they have come accustomed to in their traditional industries. So a lot of what we hear about as we go out to market and talk to folks is like, wow, this looks like a real investment banking book. This looks like what we have been accustomed to in the traditional industry, and we're so excited to have this type of professional services available to us now in cannabis. So we're very excited about that. We're excited to be on the front end. I don't know how long it's going to last, because eventually some of the bigger shops, as regulatory approval comes, they'll be able to get into the industry. But hopefully we're going to create enough exposure into the market, enough credibility that we will be the first choice for folks. It's not that easy. It's really hard to just come into the industry and really understand the nuances. I mean, operating in Massachusetts is way different from operating in Oklahoma, and it's way different from operating in California. And each of those states are different markets with way different regulatory regimes and way different economics. So, that's hard to understand and keep up with without being in the industry on a regular basis and really grasping all the nuances there. And in addition, each of those states is different operating a THC from operating CBD and hemp facilities. So look, it's tough. It's tough to keep up with everything. And, in order to be the advisor that we want to be and give that level of professionalism, you really got to spend all of your time navigating the industry.
You've been a banker for decades, right? I mean, this is not your first rodeo, but it is your first rodeo in terms of cannabis. What are the things that are completely the same about being an investment banker for cannabis? And then the other side is, what is the thing that has so deeply surprised and shocked you that you're like, I never expected X or Y when I was going to start doing investment banking for cannabis companies?
Look, the thing that's the same is, as I alluded to before, I mean, selling cannabis, the infrastructure is not that different from what I experienced in retail and CPG and the Twinkies example that I gave.
I really am like craving a Twinkie right now, guys. Thanks.
Oh my God, are you kidding me? I would murder for a Twinkie right now. There is no doubt. Like,
I haven't had
all
one in literally 20 years. It has to be.
And
like
they're
20
disgusting. And they have to tell you, they are absolutely disgusting.
I'm sure they don't taste anything like I remember.
On your teeth, it's going to be so much sugar. Your teeth are going to be so gritty. But Hershel, what is the thing that surprised you the most about being a banker in cannabis?
So, one, what surprised me are the people, the advisors that initially got in, and what the services that they were providing. The lack of professionalism or the lack of really providing or going to market with a fundamental analysis surprised me. So it sounded like, people were throwing around money and there was not necessarily a fundamental backdrop to what people were doing in the analysis. And it surprised me as I came into the market and started doing these fundamental analysis, i.e. my liquidity analysis, that this came out of left field or wasn't norm or wasn't expected. So that really surprised me significantly. The other area that surprised me, and it wasn't as much of a surprise, but some area that is really needs to develop, is the investor universe. So like as we mentioned, it was very much a Canadian investor universe, and that universe, and one of the reasons it didn't go into the private investors really weren't looking at it as much as the valuations were outside a area of normalcy. So, people were saying, I have 1 quarter of operations, I'm worth 15 times revenue. And they were saying, that's ridiculous, there's no way to buy, but the public markets are telling them, no, that's actually reality. But now that the valuations have come down, they're more willing to come into the market. So the lack of that private investor was somewhat surprising, but we're doing a lot of work now to help develop that investor universe and bring them more into cannabis and get them comfortable with cannabis, and the new people coming into cannabis, like a Bill Toller, a Justin Dye.
I'm sorry, Bill Toller and Justin Dye are where?
Bill's at a Hydra Farm, and Justin Dye is now the CEO of Medicine Man.
Okay.
Technology. He came out of Albertsons and Cerberus. So, as these individuals come in, we expect there to be more interest from the private investor universe. There's still a very significant opportunity here. Federal regulation will also help, and states' rights will help them also come into the industry. We're in a place now where the valuations are more relevant to them. And frankly, a big differentiator also that we have is that I have a dedicated capital markets and syndications gentleman, Danny Horowitz, who all he does 24/7 is go around New York, Denver, Miami. He's going to London, Asia, in order to develop this private investor network so that we have a capital base to help fund the industry going forward for these next generation of operators. And we have developed a database of over 1,000 names, and we continue to do that because, look, we have to canvass the whole world to find investors today, given the regulatory environment that we live in. And, we're going to do that, and we're going to put the legwork in to make sure that we have capital to sustain this business going forward until we get some relief from our friends in Washington.
Well, let's talk about our friends in Washington, because, a lot of the headwinds for this industry come from the regulatory uncertainty of what's going on. You've got the federal illegality, you've got this odd melange of different state laws, and then even within states, you've got local ordinances that can allow or not allow cannabis companies to sell product or to grow or to process. This November, we're going to see anywhere from 6 to 8 or 10 different states have ballot initiatives or legislative processes coming through. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that 1 or 2 big states pass. Like we get New York, New Jersey, and Arizona to adopt adult use. What does that mean for the market in general, and what does it mean from a capital markets perspective? I mean, do you expect November to have an incredibly positive impact on the ability of companies like yours to go out and raise capital for multi-state operators or other participants, or are we going to need a change at the federal level to have the spigot open up again?
So that's a good question. I think, as more as more and more states adopt adult use, obviously we're going to get to a point of a tipping point, right, where there potentially what we may need is 51% of the states, to adopt adult use, and then at that point, there's not going to be any other choice but to go federal regulatory or states' rights at the minimum. I believe that there's potentially, depending on what happens in November, there's a compromise to be had on abortion and cannabis where their states' rights kind of is applicable to both discussion points or issues. So that could be a compromise. Yes. Wonderful, right? But that might be a compromise that comes through, which is applicable to both topics. I think there's obviously a lot of strife. I mean, my hope is if there is not a change in Washington in November, I think there's going to be too many fights still to be had on healthcare, gun control, that there may not be enough airway for cannabis. If we potentially go,
I hope I'm wrong, but that's what I think too.
If we have a change where we have a Democrat that comes into the White House in November, I think gun control and at least healthcare goes off the table, because we're going to tighten up Obama, the ACA, or we're going to tighten that up as opposed to having to come into a whole new healthcare regime. And then I think gun control, look, most of the country wants some sort of universal background check. So I expect that to kind of go through, and then we can get some airway to cannabis. But another contrarian view is that Colorado, they want to maintain red, and as a concession to Colorado and the governor that they provide cannabis there to ensure that maintains red and gives him some leeway. So, look,
Corey Gardner,
it's hard to predict.
That guy's got it.
But I think, right, so on the hemp and CBD side, we believe that is going to open up more aggressively as McConnell needs hemp as an alternative crop to tobacco. So he is incentivized to get something happening in movement on the FDA side, such that it is regulated more as a supplement than in pharma. And as a result, will open up the beverage and consumable market to CBD. And then we'll have a lot more demand, and that'll push forward at least a cannabinoid profile in the public market that is widely accepted.
How do you see the vaping crisis long term for the industry? How is it going to affect it? Is it, are we going to see more fallout, or is vaping coming back?
So related to vaping, it's funny because I was just talking to somebody yesterday about this. Obviously, we have black market as a big contributor to what I believe is the issue on vaping, which is ingredients being cut or used to cut the oils, the THC oils with vitamin E acetate or MCT oil, which is causing problems related to inhaling. So, again, I think a black market is there from a regulatory perspective because sales tax are so much. So that's one area to help from that perspective. The other issue with vaping is now with the virus in China, they're shutting down all the factories and all the cartridges are made in China. So now even if they get out of the issue related to certification and testing of vapes and vape products to ensure the safety to the consumer, they can't get cartridges, or there's going to be a delay in getting cartridges from China due to the proliferation of coronavirus in China. So now they're getting hit by a double whammy, which was, it's going to be tough. But what we're hearing on the contrarian or a positive side is that people are still participating in cannabis. They're just moving more to flower than from vape, and they're moving more to edibles. So they're just changing their delivery where it's more safe. But this all goes back to, I believe, there needs to be some certification and testing for the consumer so that they can look for an emblem or something on the packaging to ensure that they have safety in the products that they are consuming. And we are working with and speaking to testing and certification labs that are trying to get a standardized emblem or some way to provide the consumer comfort that what they are ingesting or smoking is safe for them and has been tested.
When most people think of investment banks, they think of probably two or three things that you guys do, right? You take public companies public, you facilitate mergers and acquisitions. The taking companies public has been a challenge, especially for U.S. investment banks, because you can't list a U.S. company that touches the plant on either the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. And the CSE has been great as a locus for capital for the last few years. And we love Richard Carlton. The NEO has been interesting. The OTC has been interesting. Sticking with the capital raising and the IPO market, do you have any idea when the major exchanges, the New York, the NASDAQ, or even the Toronto are going to start to loosen up and allow companies to list, because the lack of access to this capital is really choking off the development of this industry.
No doubt. We need states' rights or some sort of guidance from the federal government to allow them to check the box that there's no potential issues with RICO or some sort of potential concern related to federal litigation or criminal activity that they could be potentially been engaged in as a result of supporting the cannabis industry. And that's my view, and they're going to be very conservative, because also understand that we're also dealing, and it gets bucketed to some extent into other vices, whether it be gun manufacturers, alcohol, and tobacco, which just frankly, some investment funds and banks won't even touch those industries, given some of the social issues associated with those industries. Now, what's different between us and alcohol, tobacco, and firearms is that I don't know of any medical application in any of those industries that cures epilepsy or helps with migraines or has the pharma and medical attributes that we have associated with our industry.
Proven not to kill people.
Or has the endocannabinoid system associated with it, so that your body is actually designed to use the medicine in the plant, right? I mean, it doesn't work that way. There is no alcohol cannabinoid system. Like, you drink, you're going to hurt your liver eventually and your brain. It just doesn't work. From a banking perspective, the Farm Act changed a lot of things from a CBD versus THC perspective. How are you seeing institutional investors look at that the hemp and CBD space versus the THC space?
That's very interesting as well, and a very good question. So we were just talking to another.
That's two.
We were talking to one of the larger extractors of CBD, and we're also talking, I come from a traditional universe. I did private equity coverage for a number of years, so I talked to the KKRs, the Apollos, the Aries and Leonard Greens of the world. And, we're talking about CBD, and they're all trying to get their heads around one. They're looking for something with scale in our industry. As you know, there's not really scaled mature businesses, right? The largest company on the THC side are very large companies, 150 or 200 million of revenue, right? Which is, not very big relative to a traditional industry. So they're looking for scaled opportunities. So they're looking at extractors who potentially have, 50 to 75 million of revenue. And they went out to these folks, and what they got back was they're all for it until they get to their investment committees, and their investment committees are saying, whoa, wait a minute, FDA hasn't approved this for consumption, for beverage and food. And as a result, it's not legal from an FDA perspective. And to the extent that you're selling CBD into consumables, you're essentially engaging in illegal behavior, and we can't get behind that. So we're not ready to invest. So again, we need some clarity. And there was a bill sponsored in the House, as you know, that at least moves hemp and CBD outside of medical and into a supplement, such that we can accelerate the FDA approval process, so we could have a healthy, at least CBD hemp market. And shockingly, in the House, the bipartisan bill was sponsored by two representatives from the state of Kentucky. And shockingly, McConnell needs hemp to help with his tobacco farmers. So you can see
McConnell needs a lot of things.
So you can see where this is going, and that makes me optimistic that this is going to get into the Senate. It's going to be brought up by the Senate, and we'll be able to move and accelerate the FDA approval process so we have a large end market, at least for hemp CBD, so that market could get opened up to a full pool of investors. And then once people get into hemp CBD, my expectation is they're going to quickly cross over and see all the benefits of that, of the cannabinoid, and then quickly feel comfortable about moving into THC.
Hershel, we have 2 more questions for you. And the next question is always asked by Lewis, but I'm stealing it from him.
Thief!
We always ask people, because we talk to so many entrepreneurs, can you tell us about a failure that you've had, in business, and I guess a failure in anything where you've learned from it, and it's basically shaped who you are today and helped you ultimately with your success?
Really good question, and I appreciate you putting me on the spot related to this.
So where's your biggest fuck up?
You still had to ask it, didn't you, Lewis? You couldn't let me have it.
I couldn't do it.
Just let me have it.
I'm sorry. Ish.
So I'll answer it in the way that I think best. What I think you're getting at is what event has shaped me the most relative to my career and where I sit today, and what trials, tribulations have you gone through in relation to that. So, look, I will say, and it gets a little personal, so bear with me. But when I went, I had a really good career, and I did really well in school at University of Texas, my undergrad, went to Ernst & Young, was on top of the world, went to get my MBA at UCLA Anderson in 2002. And at that time, we were going through the dot-com bubble, and I was trying to get into investment banking, had never experienced any kind of roadblocks or situations that were of an issue to me. And during that recruitment process, I essentially wasn't offered a summer internship at a large bulge bracket bank, and wasn't really getting a lot of headway into the banking industry. And people were telling me that I should go back to accounting, that things weren't going to work out. The industry is just too difficult today, and really just bad timing, and good luck to you. And, that was a hit on me. And then I had 2 options at that point. I could, I considered dropping out of my MBA program and going back to Ernst & Young, or, trudging forward. And in trudging forward, there would be, no guarantees, I would say. I could come out of my MBA, still not have a job, and end up in accounting, and that whole 2 years would have been what I would have thought of as a failure. So, I did an assessment of myself at that time, and made the decision that no, I was going to see it through and do whatever I could to ensure that I made in investment banking and was able to get into the industry. So at that time, I took some free internships. I looked to canvas the whole investment banking landscape, and I was fortunate enough to get a internship where I worked for free during the summer, and that translated into helping some friends of mine start their own investment bank in my second year of my MBA. Where again, I was working 40 hours with them, starting their investment bank and going and getting my MBA. And ultimately, the finance industry came back at the end of 2004, and I was able to secure an interview at DLJ LA, which became Credit Suisse LA. And I told them my story and how much I'd worked in order to get this opportunity to interview with them. And it hit, it translated. I was fortunate enough, they hired me When I came out of school, I went to Credit Suisse, LA, and I spent 10 years there and, got off to a great start to my career. And I thank them for giving me that opportunity and, sticking by me during the time when, I was, kind of a little down and out and, canvassing world. So, and canvassing myself. And, I look back on that, and that really, it made me being in investment banking and the things that I do mean more to me. And, this is the next iteration of that. I'm coming into cannabis. I'm a early adopter. We're all taking risks here. I think what you're hearing in the industry is a lot of us took a step back in pay, took a step back in potentially career to really be a steward for an industry that we're all hopefully fundamentally believe in for all the reasons that we described, as well as the opportunities that afforded with a growing industry that I think is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So so hopefully that answers your question. It was a little personal, and I did a lot of work on myself during that time, and I'm happy that I had that. I had to meet some challenges, and I carry that with me today, and everything I look at, to give my best foot forward as I go into anything I do.
Louis, don't you wish we could just real quick, we could fast forward just for a second, 10 years and go back and ask all of our guests that same question about cannabis and see, I wonder how the answers would be.
100%. I mean, I it's my favorite question because it reveals so much about you as a person, right? I mean, we don't tend to have people who are on the show who are failures, right? So if we're talking to you, you are successful in some way, and to get to be a success, you have to have gone through adversity, and figuring out how to work your way through that adversity is definitional. And for the people who are listening, the goal is to say, we all have made mistakes. How do you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep moving forward is how you become successful in life. And it's whether you're 50 years old or 15 years old, I really think these lessons are important. And I really appreciate you being transparent and putting your feet up on the couch and letting fly.
And we won't even bill you for it.
Oh, I'm billing you for it. Are you kidding me? I'm totally billing you for this.
Get in line. My therapist bills me every other week. So,
all right, last question, and then we'll let you go because you've been really generous with your time. What is the single story, the single thing about cannabis that is the most underreported? The thing that you wish the Wall Street Journal were talking about, or that Business Week, or that Marijuana Today was talking about? What is the story that we're all missing that you are so excited about?
Look, my most exciting, or the place that I get most excited related to cannabis is really solving two issues. One is the opiate crisis and social injustice. So on the opiate crisis, and not only from a hospice perspective, but from any kind of pain management perspective, being able to have a drug that doesn't have some of the addictive qualities of opiates that will help manage either hospice, end of life, and allow you to be with your family, or manage, we have a colleague here who had a knee replacement surgery, and he was getting concerned about opiates, so he moved over to cannabis, and that's been helping him sleep. But having that alternative treatment option to me is substantial and can mean a lot to the communities that are heavily affected by opiates. And in addition, we're seeing CBD treatment kits to help people come off of opiates. So, I think that's underreported. And then lastly, look, if people can't get behind that, from a social justice reform area, the fact that there's twice as much incarceration related to cannabis is in and of itself unfair and social inequity, but also I don't think people understand the ramifications. So I come from Florida, and to the extent you have a felony, you can't vote. So you basically neutered an entire generation of people.
I thought they just fixed that. No?
You haven't been following. They did fix it by 65% vote, but the great governor of Florida has now said to the extent that you have any outstanding fees or payments or anything with the federal government, you got to pay them off, and then only then you can get you can have voting control. So. Or voting back. So it really is a mechanism to hurt the vote and to neuter people's ability to effectuate change. And from that perspective, it also doesn't get enough news headlines. So look, I get everybody, the wacky tobacco. My father's 85 and he doesn't get it. It took me a long time to tell him about cannabis and the stigmas of cannabis. And I get that being a headline, but really they don't do enough related to those, at least those two areas where really the drug, the cannabis, the plant has, real meaningful effects in society and to people that goes beyond just a recreational, another, vice or, gateway drug that, some of the older generation have come to associate with cannabis.
Hershel, for people who want to learn more about what you guys are doing at Ello Capital, where can they find you?
Sure. www.ellocapital.com. We got links to the website, as well as I have a LinkedIn page, Hershel Gerson at Ello Capital. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we're really excited to be in the industry and be stewards to the industry and really bring professionalism to the industry.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I'm going to go get a Twinkie right now.
Well,
I did take more. I did take more from this conversation, though. But yeah, the net is I'm going to get a Twinkie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our thanks to Hershel Gerson, CEO and Managing Director at Ello Capital. As always, thanks for listening. If you want to chat with us, you can find us on Twitter at @the_GreenRush or on Instagram at @thegreenrush_podcast, or drop us an email at greenrush@kcsa.com. We love your feedback and guest ideas. And don't forget to subscribe to The Green Rush in your favorite podcatcher. And hey, Lewis, we forgot to talk about the fact that we have reached 100,000 downloads. So thank you.
Thank you. One take, Shay. One take.